Okay, so today we're going to be working on function tables. So you're going to need a couple of things before we start with our lesson for today. You're going to need your notebook, and you're going to need a piece of paper that looks like this. So it has several little charts on it, and then it has one at the bottom that talks about Abby's babysitting. So once you've got this, we are going to get started with our notebook. We're going to start, as we always do, with our learning targets. And our learning target for today says, I can write an equation for data in a table. So if you want to pause the video and write that down, then that's your choice. And then our title for today is going to be function tables. If you're going to pause the video to write this down, then while you're pausing it, go ahead and cut out this piece of paper. So what you want to do is cut them out so that they look like this. So you see I just cut out each one separately. If you want to pause the video and do that, go ahead. So what we're going to talk about today is what is a function. So we're going to start with a function. And a function, the actual definition, is a set of input. Now notice I put that in big letters. And output values that follow a math rule. So again, if you want to pause, you can. I do want you to note that we're talking about input and output value. So we talked a little bit about this when we have been in class before. We're going to talk about what an input is. So if we need to know what an input is a value that you put into a math rule. Funny that they would call that an input because you're putting it in. And an output is the value you get as a result of a math rule. So today we're going to do several different activities. We're going to first start by looking at the rule that we're trying to find. So this is the first one that we're going to work with. So if you want to find this one, it starts with 1 and 2, 3 and 6, 5 and 10. And if you want to go ahead and glue that one into your notebook, so you're going to see that I am going to glue mine in right here. Like this. Oh, I'm out of glue. This is what it's going to look like. And now what we're going to do is we're going to work through this input-output table. This is also called a function table. And we're going to try and see if we can figure out what's going on. Now let me remind you that the input can sometimes be labeled as your X, and your output can sometimes be labeled as your Y. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what do we do to our X to get to our Y. We are not looking down the chart. We are trying to figure out how do we get from here to here. So we're asking ourselves, how do we get from 1 to 2? And here's what we do. We say, well, it could be adding 1. Is there another way that I can get from 1 to 2? I could say it's times 2. So then we go to the next row in our function chart and we look at this. So if I do 3 plus 1, I ask myself, does that give me 6? Well, 3 plus 1 gives me 4. So this cannot be my answer. But the second option we said was 3 times 2. So if I do 3 times 2, does that give me 6? Yes, it does. Let's see if it holds true for this one. We already know that it can't be plus 1, and if we check that one, then we see that 5 plus 1 would not be 10. But if I do times 2, does 5 times 2 give me 10? It does. So that means that the function rule, so we're going to come down here, and we're going to write the rule for this function, is that we take our x and we multiply it by 2. So remember, these are our x's, these are our y's. So we took our x and we multiplied it by 2 to get to our y. Now there are other ways that this can be written. We can do 2 times x, we can do 2 with an x beside it, we can also do 2 parentheses x. All of those are acceptable function rules. Now we're going to use that function rule to finish the rest of this chart. So if the function rule is times 2, then we're going to take 7 and we're going to do times 2. If I do 7 times 2, then that means that my answer is 14. If I do 9 times 2, that means my answer here is 18. And then if I do 11 times 2, then that means my answer is 22. So there's our first function table all completed. Okay, we're going to do a different one now. So if you will find the one that looks like this. So now we have to figure out how do we get from -1 to 5. And this is where your calculator comes into play. So how can I get from -1 to 5? Well, it could be, if I do 5 divided by a -1, it could be a times a -5. What's another way? Well, if I do 5 minus a -1, then that means I could have added 6. And I'll tell you a little secret, guys. If you don't know how to work with the negatives, then you choose the numbers you do know how to work with. Like I could have started with 1 and 7, and I could have said that that's 1 times 7 or 1 plus 6. But it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that it's not a multiplication relationship. This is not times anything. It is an addition of 6. So this is a plus 6, this is a plus 6, and this is a plus 6. So we're going to write the function rule. Remember, these are my x's, these are my y's. So the function rule for this one is my x plus a 6 gives me my y. That is the rule for this function. Now that we know the rule, we're going to use that to finish this function chart or this function table. So I'm going to take the 7, and what do I need to do with it? I need to add a 6. So 7 plus 6 gives me 13. And then I take my 9 and I add 6. So 9 plus 6 gives me 15. So that function chart or function table is complete. The next function table that we're going to do looks like this one. So if you'll find this one for me. Remember that these are my x's and these are my y's. And if the negatives scare you, then just skip those. And let's move on to like this one. We have a 0 and a 4. Well, if you think about 0 and 4, there's a couple of different ways that I can get from 0 to 4. I could just add 4. Now sometimes they'll be even more complex, like it could be times 2 and then subtract something. But this one is just pretty straightforward, plus 4. And then I do 1 plus 4, and that of course gives me 5. And then if I have -2, so if I'm at -2 and I add 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you see that that takes me to a +2, which is what this one says. So obviously my function rule for this one is that I take my x's and I add 4 to get to my y. There's my function rule. Now we're going to use that to complete the rest of my function table. So I have 2 and I'm going to add 4, and that's going to give me an answer of 6. I have 3, and I add 4, and that's going to give me an answer of 7. And then I have 4, and I add 4, and that gives me an answer of 8. So there is my completed function table for the rule x plus 4 is equal to y. So the final one is talking about Abby's babysitting. And we're going to use this one to talk about a real life context and see if we can figure this out. So let me tell you how you're going to see these. This says that we're comparing the number of hours that Abby worked, and we're using an H for that instead of an X, but this is still my input value, guys. And we know that if we take the number of hours that she worked and we manipulate it or change it somehow using math, that we get the amount of money that she earned, and we're using an M for money to represent her output. So now what we want to figure out is what is the connection. So basically, if you know anything about a job, you know that you get paid for every hour that you work. So if I get paid $10 for every hour and I work 1 hour, then I'm going to make $10. If I work 2 hours, then I'm going to do 10 and another 10, which is 20. If I work 8 hours, then that's $10 for every hour that I worked. So that's 10 times 8, which tells me that I would make $80 for that day. So we're trying to figure out what is the connection between this number and this number. So you begin to question, what are the different ways that I can get from 5 to 30? Well, one way is that I could add 25, but that's really not what we do with hourly wages. Really what we do is we say for every hour that you work, we're going to give you a set amount of money. And that's multiplication. So what can I multiply by 5 to get to 30? Well, those of you that know your math know that that is 6. So now I begin to check them. I want to check the 6 to 36. So if I do 6 plus 25, which was this first one that we came up with, does that give me 36? It does not. But if I do 6 times 6, does that give me 36? And you very quickly realize that it does. So then we check it with the next one, which is 7. So I do 7 times 6, and that does in fact give me 42. And then I do 8 times 6, and that does in fact give me 48. So obviously what I'm doing here is I am multiplying by 6, but I can't just say multiply by 6. I have to write it out as a rule. And I can't use X's and Y's this time because we don't have X's and we don't have Y's. We have H's and M's. So this means that for every hour that Abby works, she's getting $6. So that means we do 6 times the number of hours that she worked, and that gives me the amount of money that she's going to make. You could write it with the 6 coefficient and the M beside it. And then of course we know there's lots of different ways that we can represent our information. So this is the completed function table. We have found the rule, it's times 6, and we wrote our rule as 6 times the H, representing the hours, equals the amount of money that Abby's going to earn. So please make sure that your notebook is correct and that you have put all of your information into your notebook as mine looks. Thanks.